Tony D and Little Joan, and this is a screenwriter's take on the unbearable weight of massive talent starring Nicolas Cage as Nicolas Cage. Smash a like and subscribe. Thank you for smash liking and subscribing. Thanks for checking out my books, The Pineys, books 1 through 16, available at Amazon.com. Don't forget, Kindle Unlimited is free. All right, so I'll give you my non-spoiler review as always, and then the spoiler review. So my non-spoiler review is it's pretty good. This movie made me laugh. It's a comedy. It's a satire. I like Nick Cage. I like movies satirizing Hollywood, and so it connected on a lot of different levels for me. Now, for someone who doesn't like Nick Cage or if you don't like movies satirizing Hollywood, I would say you might be into it. I'm not sure. Pedro Pascal is in it. He's pretty good, I gotta say. Neil Patrick Harris plays Cage's agent. Demi Moore makes a cameo. Tiffany Haddish, the guy from Mad TV, who I like, whose name I always forget. It's pretty funny. Pretty funny. The ending is, you can kind of see coming a mile away, but that's okay in a comedy as long as it makes you laugh. That's where it kind of slows down right at the end, but it's so short it doesn't even matter. So yeah, I would say I could recommend this movie unless you hate Nicolas Cage. Okay, so that was the non-spoiler review. Here's the spoiler review. First act, they set up a fake Nick Cage. Now, Nick Cage has been married 5 times. He is, I believe he's the nephew of Francis Ford Coppola. And he's had a crazy, crazy life. But they make it pretty simple. Nick Cage is a divorced dad who is struggling with his career. He's spent too much money. And he's trying to win his teenage daughter back. So that's the setup. He is a bit self-centered. So, I think a lot of this comes from Cage. I like that Cage is satirizing himself as a self-absorbed actor who makes himself the center of attention even at his daughter's 16th birthday party. It comes off pretty cringe for him. And so the whole first act is about his career, and he doesn't want to go to this island for this millionaire who wants him to come for the weekend for $1 million, even though he needs the money. But then he doesn't get this part, so he's like, oh, I gotta go do it. So second act, he arrives at the villa of Pedro Pascal, who's the biggest Nick Cage fan in the world, and Cage doesn't want to be there. He just thinks nothing of him. The fan, of course, wrote a screenplay and sent it to the agent. The agent doesn't even tell Nick Cage, and so Pedro Pascal have these awkward moments where he's trying to talk to Cage, but he's so nervous he can't even do it. And eventually, Cage comes around, and they realize they kind of like the same movies, and they have sort of the same sensibilities. And Cage is actually happy. He actually has a good time with him, and he's kind of happy that he's there. Although he's during the first act, he tells his agent he's going to quit acting, which is a typical Hollywood thing. It's very Hollywood, very, very much satirizing like an actor who's way too full of himself. So he's going to quit. I'm going to quit acting, and but he's not. He's obviously not really going to quit for that long. So he decides he likes Pedro Pascal enough that he's going to read his screenplay because they have the same movie sensibilities. And but then he he gets a I think he gets a call from Tiffany Haddish, or no, he gets kidnapped by Tiffany Haddish and the guy from Mad TV, and they tell him that Pedro Pascal is part of an international criminal organization, and that he's kidnapped a girl because they're trying to pressure uh, the government in Catalina, and the CIA, represented by Tiffany Haddish and the guy from Mad TV, want Cage to help them because they can't get to his compound. So Cage at first doesn't want to help him because he likes Pedro Pascal, but eventually he agrees to do it. So it's Cage as himself trying to be like a spy, and then he completely screws it up in a pretty funny scene, but somehow manages to not get caught, I'll say. And all that's pretty funny. But the longer he stays on the island, the more he's convinced Pedro Pascal is a criminal. Like at first he says, "No, there's no way this guy's a criminal. I'm an actor. I know these things." And but slowly but surely starts to dawn on him that he's in real danger. And he helps the CIA, but eventually it's revealed that Pedro Pascal's cousin or brother is the real head of the organization, and Pedro Pascal is just sort of like a figurehead. And so when the brother or cousin pressures Pedro Pascal, he basically gives him an ultimatum. He says, you can either kill Nick Cage because we think he's the one ratting us out, and then they overhear his phone calls or something, or they tap his phone or whatever. And so you can either kill him or I'll kill you. So, of course, Pedro Pascal is going to take Nick Cage and kill him. At the same time, the CIA guys realize what's happening, and they tell Nick Cage, get out of there. You're in trouble. But there's a problem because Pedro Pascal has brought his family. Now that his wife and daughter. Now the reason he's brought them to the island at first is actually because Cage convinces him that he wants to make Pedro's screenplay, but the screenplay is in danger because there's a whole long bit about the creative process, and Pedro becomes convinced that the creative process is being jammed up because Nick Cage can't face up to his demons and face up to his daughter who's giving him problems. So he brings in the family and attempts to give him therapy. This here is part of a scene where they both take acid and drive around the island. It's pretty funny. So then they bring the wife and daughter in. So Nick Cage eventually has to kill Pedro Pascal, and Pedro Pascal has to kill him. So they have this scene where they're about to try to kill each other. Cage gets guns from Pedro Pascal, has a life-size statue of him with real guns. So Nick Cage steals the guns, and they have this confrontation, but it gets interrupted by the real criminals, and then they're on the run. Then they have to save his wife and daughter and Pedro's girlfriend, which they save the wives. They save the wife and girlfriend, but the daughter gets kidnapped, and she's going to be shot on live TV along with another girl they kidnap at the beginning of the movie that they're using to influence the election, right? So Nick Cage then has to disguise himself as this mobster and act as the mobster and use his acting abilities, which is kind of funny. But this mobster hasn't been seen in 15 years, so that's why he can get away with it. So he actually does save his daughter, and in a scene, using his acting abilities. But then they're on the run, and Pedro Pascal has to save him, and eventually the movie ends kind of like where it's headed, because the whole time him and Pedro are talking about movies and making movies. So of course, what does it end? It ends with they make a movie about what happened, and the end of the movie, as they're wrapping it up, as literally Nick Cage and his wife and daughter are escaping, they cut to the movie of that, and it's Demi Moore playing his wife, and I forget who's playing his daughter, and they have a big dramatic scene, and Nick Cage is just overacting enough to make it, more of a Hollywood thing. And they're at the premiere of the movie, and Pedro Pascal's there, and it's all good. So the only people that die in this are the CIA agents and the actual criminal guy. So it's not bad. But that ending of the movie, about movies, turning into a movie, that's been done many times. There are a lot of elements here from adaptation and other movies that satirize Hollywood. But I will say they get to most of the jokes. Like, they just jam them all in. And even though it's been done before, it's kind of different because it's the spin with Nicolas Cage. And that part's kind of fun. It's also fun to see him very much in the beginning. And I would have actually liked seeing a whole movie about this, where Cage is so desperate to get a job. He meets with this director, and then he has this uncomfortable scene where he insists on reading a line to him while they're waiting for the valets brought the director's car, and then Cage shuts his door and then does the line right in front of him in this weird, intimidating scene. It's kind of cool. And I was just reading a little bit about Cage online, how he has this idea about being the character, which must have been very interesting for him to be in this movie, since it's supposed to be him, but it's not him. So kind of cool. But I thought the acting was pretty fun, because Cage, I think, is just frantic enough, right? He's playing himself, but he's playing a version of himself that's more neurotic and frantic and crazy. And then at the end, he sort of resolves things with his ex-wife and daughter, and like, you get the impression they're kind of a family again, which of course it again isn't true. He has more than one child, and he has 5 ex-wives, including Lisa Marie Presley, which I kind of forgot about. They were married for 107 days. So it's kind of a wacky movie that just, dives into the Nick Cage lore a bit. And the best scenes probably is when Nick Cage is talking to his younger self, and his younger self, which I guess kind of represents his ego, is really kind of driving things. He's kind of pushing him to be more driven. So it's like Cage, how he sees himself. I don't know. Again, I don't know if that's true either, but it was kind of a cool scene. And I guess what they did is they got a younger actor, and then they deep faked Nick Cage over top of him, I think, or they might have done it with makeup with the real Nick Cage. It's kind of hard to. I don't think they could have done it, because the face, it is Nick Cage, but it looks different. Like, it looks like young Nick Cage. I mean, maybe they used the CGI and just made him younger, and then he played himself. But it was very interesting to see Nick Cage, a persona of Nick Cage, go up against kind of younger other persona Nick Cage, like younger Nick Cage. It was very interesting. And there were a lot of funny bits. Probably the funniest bit for me is when young Nick Cage kissed older Nick Cage, and it's not really happening. It's like a fantasy inside his head, but like it was just very funny because I didn't expect it. And as much as I'm annoyed by Pedro Pascal, he is very good in the movie, because he takes kind of a backseat to Nick Cage throughout the entire movie. Like, I was expecting a scene where he gets mad at him and maybe yells at him. Never happens, which I kind of enjoyed, because he's just so enamored of Nick Cage, like that wouldn't happen. And the bit with his cousin or brother, whoever he is, comes off great because it's very subtle. Like, at first you think Pedro Pascal is the lead villain or whatever, but then no, it turns out it's his cousin. Tiffany Haddish is kind of annoying. I think she kind of tries to steal some scenes, but I'm really not buying it. Doesn't seem like she's great to even be a CIA. She didn't come off believable as a CIA spy. Like, she's saying a line. She's not awful. It's just like, you're in Spain and you're undercover, I guess. And I guess you're undercover as an American tourist, because I'm not sure what else you could be in that circumstances. The guy from Mad TV is just as normal. He kind of looks like Mark Wahlberg. He's just always continually, he plays characters that are always frustrated. He's pretty good. But overall, yeah, I give it a thumbs up. I mean, look, it's not Shakespeare. It's the Nick Cage version of this, and they even make a joke about all the movies he's done. And he's got an interesting line where he's like, "Hey, this isn't a career. This is work to me, and I want to work, and I want to work as much as possible, basically." So, I think there is some of Cage in this, but you kind of got to pick it out. Yeah, it's kind of fun. Kind of fun. It gives Cage a chance to make fun of himself. He does do some good physical comedy, and yeah, I think it works. So I wanted to see this when it came out. It didn't get a tremendous amount of reception. I think it did okay-ish, but some people in the stream saw it and didn't particularly like it, if I'm recalling correctly. But I thought it was fun. Tiffany Haddish kind of annoys me anyway. Neil Patrick Harris, just sort of there. He's just being very much a supporting guy. And rest of the cast is fine. And you could tell what this is. It's like, this came out 2 years ago. This is sort of like the vacation movie for a big celebrity like Nick Cage, right? They shot it at an exotic location for probably 3 or 4 months. So he gets to spend 3 or 4 months in beautiful Spain, make a movie about himself, which is probably a lot easier than any other movie he would make. He gets to hang out and everybody's making jokes at his expense, and it's all cool. I like that a guy like Cage can make fun of himself, even if it's, some of it's not true. Obviously, they're not going into deep Nick Cage lore and his personal life, but in a roundabout way they sort of are. His problems with money, not sure, I don't think he ever had a substance abuse problem, not to my knowledge, but he does get drunk in a scene and he takes drugs in another scene. So yeah, and again, the only metric here for comedy is it funny? I found it funny. I think if you like stuff about Hollywood and Nick Cage, I think you'll find it funny. I think you will. Anyhow, that's it for me, Tony D and Little Joan. Check me out at the Wildwood Convention Center Saturday from 10 to 4 on the boardwalk in Wildwood, New Jersey for WildCon. I'll be there, and I'll be doing a talk on how to hunt the Jersey Devil. Hope to see you there. We'll see you tomorrow.